There are moments in life when a soul feels distant from the world, cut off from familiar voices, and surrounded by a silence that seems deafening. To the natural eye, it appears as abandonment, a period of loneliness that feels unjust or cruel. But in the realm of the spirit, this isolation carries a deeper meaning. It is often the sacred signature of being chosen by God. When God sets someone apart for a divine purpose, He often leads them through a path that feels solitary, but it is not empty. It is filled with unseen grace and divine intention. This isolation is not punishment, it is preparation. It is not rejection, it is refinement. God, in His wisdom, draws the chosen ones away from distractions, away from applause, and even away from the support of others, to bring them into deeper intimacy with Himself. He allows silence to teach what words cannot. In those quiet seasons, the soul becomes more attentive, more receptive, more surrendered. It is in this divine solitude that transformation begins to take root, not on the surface, but deep within. People often measure God's presence by activity, affirmation, and community. But God frequently works in ways that are hidden, quiet, and uncelebrated. The ones He chooses for deeper works are invited into this sacred space where only faith can stand and where dependence on God becomes the only light in the darkness. There is something holy in being unseen by others yet fully known by God. The world may not recognize the worth of such a season, but heaven does. And in time, what looked like isolation is revealed to be a divine classroom, where God was not absent, but more present than ever before, shaping the soul for something greater than it could yet imagine. The voice of God is rarely heard in the noise and chaos of the world. It comes instead in stillness, in the quiet moments when the heart is stripped of distractions and the soul begins to listen with reverence. This is why God often removes the chosen ones from the crowd, not to leave them alone, but to teach them how to hear Him clearly. The world is filled with many voices, opinions, demands, praise, criticism, and noise that drowns out the whisper of the divine. But when one is called for a sacred purpose, that person must be able to distinguish God's voice above all others. This clarity comes not in crowds, but in solitude. When everything else is silenced, what remains is the voice that truly matters. In the quiet, the heart becomes tender, the spirit more alert, and the will more pliable. It is there that God speaks direction, correction, and revelation, not with thunder, but with peace. His words are gentle, but they carry eternal weight. He doesn't rush to compete with the noise of the world. Instead, He waits for the heart that is willing to be still. Those who are chosen must become familiar with the sound of heaven. This is why divine isolation is not a punishment, it is an invitation. It is God saying, "Come closer, hear me without distraction, know me beyond the surface." This hearing leads to deeper obedience. It trains the soul to move not by emotion, but by the leading of the Spirit. And once this sensitivity is developed in solitude, it carries into the mission ahead. The chosen ones are entrusted with the message of God because they have first learned to hear His voice clearly, alone, in the quiet that only He can fill. Throughout Scripture, we see a consistent pattern. Those whom God calls are often led first into solitude before they are revealed publicly. This is not accidental. It is a divine rhythm, repeated generation after generation. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before returning to lead Israel. Elijah withdrew to a cave where he encountered God not in wind, fire, or earthquake, but in a gentle whisper. Even Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert for 40 days before beginning his ministry. The path of the chosen is marked by separation before elevation. This biblical pattern reveals a truth we often overlook. God uses isolation to prepare his vessels. The world looks for immediate platforms, but heaven looks for prepared hearts. God hides his chosen, not to forget them, but to form them. These seasons are not wasted. They are times when the character is refined, the flesh is crucified, and the soul learns the cost of obedience. Without them, the mission would be too heavy to carry. The solitude ensures that the one who is sent does not serve for attention, but from surrender. The wilderness is not just a place of emptiness. It is where heaven meets earth in secret. It is where identity is confirmed, motives are purified, and faith is strengthened. Those who emerge from this pattern do so not in their own strength, but clothed in divine authority. They know the silence of the desert, and thus they are not shaken by the silence of man. Their confidence is rooted in something unseen. This sacred process is not always understood by others, but it is honored by God. The pattern remains consistent. The private encounter precedes the public calling. And those who walk in the footsteps of the prophets must first walk alone with God. When God sets someone apart, it is not merely to remove them from others, but to make space for revelation that transforms from the inside out. Divine isolation becomes the soil where the deepest truths are planted, watered, and grown, not for temporary inspiration, but for lasting transformation. In solitude, the distractions of the world are peeled away layer by layer until the heart stands bare before God. It is in that sacred vulnerability that the voice of the Spirit begins to write truth, not on stone tablets, but upon the human heart. In the stillness, what seemed like emptiness reveals itself to be fullness. God uses this space to speak not only to the mind, but to the soul. It is where he reveals his will, his nature, and the hidden things that cannot be understood by casual faith or surface-level religion. The chosen are invited into the quiet classroom of the Spirit, where their questions are not always answered, but where their trust is deepened. They learn that revelation is not always loud. Often it is a slow unfolding, a gentle stirring, a steady burning within. The greatest lessons are not shouted from stages, they are whispered in secret. Those whispers form convictions that cannot be shaken even when storms come. This revelation born in isolation is not meant to be hoarded, but to prepare the chosen for a life of service. It gives them a message rooted in divine encounter, not human opinion, and because it was received in solitude, it carries the weight of authenticity when spoken in public. Such transformation cannot be rushed. It takes time, surrender, and stillness. Yet what is born from this hidden place becomes unshakable, a life marked by truth that was not taught by man, but revealed by God himself. The wilderness, often seen as a place of barrenness and struggle, is in fact one of the most powerful places God uses to shape his chosen ones. It is not a place of defeat, but of divine encounter. In the wilderness there are no distractions, no applause, no comfort, only dependence on God. And it is in that dependence that real strength is born. The wilderness strips away everything unnecessary until what remains is faith that is pure, tested, and anchored in God alone. Throughout Scripture, the wilderness is not a punishment, it is a proving ground. It was in the desert that Israel learned who God was as their provider and protector. It was in the wilderness that John the Baptist prepared the way for the Lord, far from the temple courts. and it was there that Jesus fasted, prayed, and faced temptation. Each time the wilderness became a place of encounter, a sacred training ground where intimacy with God was forged through surrender and struggle. In isolation, far from the expectations and opinions of others, the soul learns resilience. The chosen learn to survive not on what is visible, but on what is eternal. They learn to hear God without intermediaries, to trust without seeing, and to obey without guarantees. These lessons cannot be learned in comfort. They are learned in the hidden places where only God is watching. The power that emerges from the wilderness is not loud or boastful. It is quiet, steady, and enduring. It is the kind of power that carries purpose without pride. And when the time comes to step forward, the chosen emerge not as victims of their isolation, but as vessels refined by it, carrying the weight of heaven not just in word, but in spirit and truth. Being set apart by God is often misunderstood. To many, it may look like rejection or failure. Friends may drift away, opportunities may close, and familiar paths may suddenly feel foreign. But this sacred separation is not a sign of being cast aside. It is evidence of being called higher. The chosen are not forgotten. They are being refined, molded into vessels that can carry the weight of God's purpose without breaking under it. There is a difference between being alone and being set apart. The world equates solitude with loss, but in the eyes of heaven, separation often signals promotion. God removes his servants from noise and comfort because he is building something within them that cannot be seen but will one day be revealed. He sets them apart so they may no longer live according to the patterns of the world, but according to the movement of his Spirit. This process is often painful, not because God is cruel, but because transformation always requires a letting go. The chosen are called to surrender not just what is bad, but often what is good, what is familiar, what is comfortable. It is a pruning that produces fruit in due time. During this sacred separation, God becomes the only source of identity, the only voice of direction, the only anchor of hope. This is why those who are set apart must walk with courage. The path is narrow and it often lacks applause, but it is filled with divine presence. The very act of being removed from the crowd is God's way of ensuring that the heart belongs fully to him. It is in this hidden place that purity is restored, clarity is given, and obedience becomes a joy. The chosen are set apart not to be forgotten, but to be made ready. The world has its own way of measuring value. It applauds visibility, craves productivity, and celebrates those constantly surrounded by attention. So, when someone enters a season of divine silence or separation, the world quickly misunderstands it. It sees the absence of movement as failure, the quiet as weakness, and the solitude as insignificance. But God's ways are higher than the world's standards. What appears as stillness to people may actually be sacred progress in the eyes of heaven. This misunderstanding often adds to the weight carried by the chosen ones. Not only do they walk through spiritual refinement, but they also endure the opinions and judgments of those who do not see the inner work taking place. Yet this is part of the calling. God does not shape his vessels according to public expectation, but according to eternal design. He is not concerned with appearances. He is concerned with the heart. The chosen must come to peace with being misunderstood. Just as prophets, apostles, and even Christ himself were misjudged during their silent seasons, so too are those being prepared by God today. Divine isolation is not meant to impress people. It is meant to transform the soul. The approval of man must fade so that the voice of God can rise. What matters in the hidden season is not what others say, but what God is doing beneath the surface. Eventually, what God does in secret will speak loudly in public. but that unveiling belongs to His timing. Until then, the chosen must trust that their value does not lie in worldly visibility, but in faithful obedience. They are not overlooked, they are being overhauled. And though the world may not understand the silence, heaven is fully aware of the miracle taking place in the quiet. There is a divine sequence often seen in the lives of those chosen by God. Isolation comes before mission. The hidden season is not a delay, it is preparation. Before a voice can speak to the masses, it must first be shaped in private. Before a calling can be fulfilled, the heart must be humbled and aligned with God's will. This is why the chosen walk alone for a time, not because they are being punished, but because they are being readied for something greater. When the mission is finally revealed, it is not birthed from ambition, but from intimacy. The one who has been alone with God carries a message not rooted in self, but in surrender. Their words are not mere inspiration. They carry the fragrance of divine encounter. The weight of their calling does not rest on talent or effort, but on a foundation that was laid in silence, in surrender, and in tears. Every meaningful mission begins in the secret place. There, in solitude, pride is stripped away, motives are purified, and trust is built. God does not rush this process. He is not interested in performance. He is committed to transformation. The chosen often feel forgotten, but they are being deeply formed. When the time comes for them to step forward, they do so with clarity, conviction, and compassion, because they know the one who sent them, and they have been tested in the fire of divine preparation. There is no shortcut to purpose. The journey through isolation is not something to escape, but something to embrace, for it is there that God writes the mission on the heart, not with ink, but with trials, truth, and grace. And when they are finally sent, they carry heaven's authority, because they were first prepared in heaven's silence. In the stillness, when all other voices are silent, the soul becomes attuned to the one voice that truly matters, God's. His voice is not loud, not forceful, and rarely comes through the noise of the world. It comes in whispers, in gentle nudges, in quiet impressions that speak directly to the heart. This is why solitude is not something to resist, but to receive. It is in this sacred quiet that God's whisper can be heard with clarity and power. The world values volume. It seeks clarity through opinions, debates, and constant motion. But the kingdom of God often works in reverse. It is in stillness that strength is found, and in silence that direction is given. The chosen learn to lean into this quiet, to find God not in the earthquake or the fire, but in the still small voice that speaks peace in the middle of uncertainty. That whisper becomes the compass by which they move forward, not by sight or sound, but by spiritual discernment. To hear God's whisper, one must first silence the noise within, the fear, the doubt, the pressure to perform. These are all voices that must be laid down in solitude. In this sacred space, the heart is trained to respond not to emotional highs, but to divine truths. This becomes the foundation of lasting obedience, a kind of obedience that doesn't require confirmation from others, but flows from intimacy with God. This whisper shapes destinies. It leads chosen ones where the crowd cannot follow. It becomes their anchor when storms rage, and their guide when the path is unclear. The chosen carry out God's will not because it is easy or popular, but because they have heard His voice, soft, sure, and steady, the secret place where only the Spirit speaks. There is a beautiful paradox in the journey of the chosen. Though they may appear to walk alone, they are never truly alone. In fact, it is in their solitude that they often walk most closely with God. The absence of people does not mean the absence of His presence. When others cannot see the journey, when the path is quiet and hidden, God is nearer than ever, guiding, comforting, and revealing himself in ways only experienced in the secret place. This closeness is not always felt through emotions. It is deeper than feelings. It is a knowing, a confidence that grows over time. The chosen begin to recognize that while human companionship may come and go, the presence of God is constant and faithful. They are led by a hand they cannot always see, but they learn to trust its grip. They hear a voice others might miss, because they have trained their hearts to listen in the silence. God allows this sacred aloneness not to discourage, but to draw the heart fully toward him. In this divine intimacy, the chosen discover the sufficiency of his love. They begin to rely not on praise, affirmation, or visibility, but on the quiet strength that comes from walking daily with the Lord. This walk builds resilience, it anchors them in truth, it frees them from the need to be understood or accepted by the world. The one who walks with God may walk a narrow and lonely road, but that road is paved with grace. Each step is guided by the one who sees the end from the beginning, and though others may not accompany them, the chosen find that their greatest companion is the one who called them. His presence is their portion, and it never departs. In the sacred season of being set apart, a unique kind of intimacy with God is born, one that cannot be rushed, copied, or explained to those who have never walked through it. This intimacy grows not in crowded rooms or through public affirmation, but in quiet moments where the soul learns to depend entirely on the presence of God. The chosen are drawn into a deeper place where they are no longer satisfied with surface-level faith or second-hand revelation. They begin to hunger for more of God, not just his blessings, but his heart. It is here, in this divine intimacy, that transformation happens. The chosen no longer measure their value by the opinions of others. Their identity is no longer tied to titles, success, or achievements. Instead, they begin to live from a place of inner security, rooted in the knowledge that they are seen, known, and loved by God. Every act of surrender draws them closer. Every silent prayer strengthens their bond. In the absence of crowds, they discover the fullness of Christ. This closeness cannot be manufactured through religious routine. It is forged through seasons of isolation, through tears no one sees, through questions whispered in the dark, and answers felt deep in the spirit. It becomes the wellspring from which all obedience flows. Ministry, service, and calling are no longer burdens. They become expressions of love born from time spent with God. The chosen are prepared in this hidden place, not just for their own benefit, but so they can carry the fragrance of God into a world that desperately needs him. They emerge not just with knowledge, but with presence, and the world may not understand the cost of such closeness, but it cannot deny the power that flows from a life rooted in divine intimacy. The season of divine isolation is not meant to last forever. It is a chapter in the greater story of God's purpose, not the entire narrative. Often, when someone is walking through a long season of separation or silence, it feels permanent. The days stretch on, and the questions multiply. But in God's timing, every season has a purpose, and every purpose has a divine conclusion. What feels endless to the heart is, in heaven's eyes, part of a perfectly timed unfolding. God never wastes a moment of solitude. He uses every second to shape, refine, and prepare, but he also knows when the work of the hidden place is complete. When the heart is ready, when the soul is steady, when the character is strong enough to carry the weight of the calling, he opens the door. And what follows is not a return to the familiar, but a step into the assignment, that has been quietly prepared in the background of silence. The chosen must understand that isolation is not their identity, it is their formation. It is the training ground, not the final destination. It teaches dependence on God, but it also equips them to walk confidently when He says, "Go." When the time of revealing comes, the world may be surprised, but the chosen will not be. They will step into their role with humility, knowing that the season of being hidden was not a delay, but a divine necessity. It is in God's nature to finish what He starts. So even if the road has felt long and the silence deep, the promise remains, "He who called you is faithful." The night will pass, the dawn will come, and what was once concealed will shine with the beauty of a life shaped by God Himself